two ways that I assemble my quilt top depending on which machine orientation I'll be using. Let's start with the sit-down or domestic quilting machine. For this demo, I will be assembling this 30 by 30 inch quilt top. Since this would be on a sit-down machine where I would move the fabric underneath the machine, I want to make sure that my layers all stay in place really nicely. My preferred method for basting is to use spray adhesive, and my favorite brand is Sullivan's Quilt Basting Spray. It's water soluble and a small amount goes a long way. Start by laying out your backing right side down and make sure it's oriented correctly if it is directional. Next, lay out your batting centered on your backing and make sure everything is nice and flat and there are no wrinkles in your batting. This quilt has 2 layers, but the same technique applies if you only have 1 layer of batting. Finally, lay out your quilt top, also noting the orientation of the top and bottom compared to your backing if it's needed. Next, we're going to fold our quilt top in half and lightly spray both the batting as well as the back of the quilt top. Then we'll unfold it and pressing from the center of the quilt top out, doing our best to lay it flat. It will stick right where you lay it, so if your quilt top is big, grab a buddy to help you do this part. You can each grab a corner and pull it down from the sides. Once the top is in place, we'll add a layer of basting spray between the 2 layers of batting using the same folding over method. Now for the last layer, we want to do it from the back to make sure that there aren't any wrinkles or gathers in the backing fabric. And again, after you spray and lay, smooth it out with your hands from the center of the quilt and go outwards. This way, if there are any wrinkles, you can work them out to the edges of the fabric. And once the fabric is sprayed and stuck down, it will very well stay in place. You can see here now how nice and tight the layers are adhered together. Finally, I always pin all the layers in each corner with a safety pin. The last thing you want is for your corner to fold over and get quilted down without you noticing. It freaking sucks when it happens. Here are also a couple of tips for managing your quilt top while quilting on a sit-down machine. Try to keep the bulk of your quilt on the table if at all possible, and then you can either accordion fold the excess fabric while you're quilting. This will help eliminate some of the weight on your shoulders, which is really nice. Or even better, you can roll your excess quilt top fabric towards you almost as if it were on a quilting frame pull. Then as you're quilting, the back of your machine can either help push the roll more or stop it from unrolling. If your quilt top hangs off the sides of your table, it can also be helpful to place another table next to your quilting space to essentially extend your table top. So now let's talk about loading your quilt on a long arm frame. There are many different methods to load a quilt top, so I just want to show you my favorite method. I start by laying out my quilt top on the floor in the direction that I plan to load it. It's nice to have it ready. I always start with the backing fabric, and this is my way of doing it so that I don't ever have to go to the back of my machine. This method is also really nice on my back because I don't have to bend forward too far, even though my machine is almost 30 inches deep. So start by draping the backing fabric over all of the bars. Clean off any stray threads and use the back of your frame to help the fabric lay out flat and straight. Do your best to place your backing in the center of your frame. Now grab the leader from your front bar and feed it under your second bar and drape it up over the top of that second bar and bring it back towards you. This way it lays flat on top of the second bar, and this will give you a platform for pinning your backing. Next, pull your backing fabric towards you and lay it on top of the front bar's leader that you just placed on your second bar, lining up your backing fabric's edge with the edge of that leader. Now, starting from the center of the fabric and the leader, use straight pins to start pinning the backing to the leader fabric. Your pins should go into both layers about 1/4 inch from the edges of the fabric, much like a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I use 2-inch straight pins and I try to take big bites with each one. Each pin head should be about 1/4 inch away from the pin point of the previous pin. When you're pinning, always start from the center of the fabric and work your way to each edge. This will prevent your fabric from shifting to the left or the right. Now we'll let the leader that we just pinned hang down and we'll start winding the backing fabric onto that front bar. Do your best to keep things smooth. Draping your backing fabric over the back bars should help this effort quite a bit. Now we're going to pin the other edge of our backing to our back leader. Again, starting in the center, line up your backing with the leader and pull it upwards to make sure that it will line up. Then pin from the center to the edge, and then from the center to the other edge. Important note, make sure that your back leader is going under the bar just underneath it. That bar is what makes your quilt lay flat while you are quilting. Now we'll roll up the rest of our backing until only about 8 inches is showing. And now it's time to load the quilt top. Lay it out over all the bars just as we did with the backing. And now you can see that it helps to load the backing first so that it will actually act as a platform in laying out our quilt top to help it lay flat as we roll it. When you're laying it out, center your quilt top with your backing, trying to give it the same amount of excess fabric on each side. Now unwind your second bar's leader a few inches and pin the quilt top to the leader. Again, start in the center, working your way towards each edge, taking big bites with each pin. Then you can start rolling your quilt top onto the bar. Do your best to keep the side edges lined up and take your time to smooth things out as needed. Wind the quilt top until you are just below the backing fabric's top edge. Let's go ahead and insert the batting next. We don't want to just yank the batting underneath the quilt top pole because it can stretch it out and distort the batting and create waves and wrinkles. I start by just draping the batting over the front bars until it extends just past the edge of the quilt top. Then grab the batting from the edge and kind of accordion fold it down until you reach the crevice between the two poles. Then you can shove that batting under the quilt top pole and grab it underneath the quilt top, knowing full well that you have enough slack in the batting to pull it through without stretching it out. Also notice that I'm doing all of this very close to the front poles. This allows me to not get a sore back, and it will aid us in the next step of stitching down our top edge. Which brings me to the next step, stitching down the top edge of all 3 layers of fabric. Try to stitch down your quilt top 1/4 inch away or less from the edge of the quilt top. We want to make sure that the quilting stays flat, but that this seam will end up being covered by the binding fabric. It's also helpful to backstitch each corner. When you get to the corner, lower your machine's needle into the corner of the quilt top. And now you can advance your quilt and watch as your machine gets closer to the back pole. You'll see that our machine is in position and ready to stitch down the side edges of the quilt top. I like to pin my backing and batting and make it nice and taut before stitching down the sides. This will help avoid any wrinkles in the backing fabric. And then I carefully stitch down both of the side edges, but only as far as the poles will let me. I continue stitching down the side edges as I advance the quilt throughout the quilting process. And once that's done, I'm set up and ready to start the actual quilting. Let's do this.